Hello, thank you for joining us today. Today we have Dr. Brye, and she's an elementary bilingual ed faculty member at Cal State Fullerton, and she is going to talk today a little bit about her area of expertise, which focuses on mathematics and specifically addressing areas of inequities among students. So welcome, Dr. Brye.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And as Dr. Gautreaux mentioned, some of my background is in mathematics education. And really what I've started to look into is how we're looking at social justice in the mathematics classroom. And that led me to doing some work with folks at Teaching Works, which is out of the University of Michigan. So you'll see that some of the work that I'm sharing today comes from them, and that's from Dr. Deborah Ball and Amber Willis. So I wanted to let you know that they're notated there on the screen. I'm assuming everybody can see the PowerPoint. So if there's any, there'll be times that I'll pause and ask questions, but if for any reason you can't see or you need me to go slower, just go ahead and you can do the hand raise or let me know and we'll go from there. But the goals for today is to gain some common framing for how we talk about disrupting inequities and situate this inside of the math classroom. So what does that look like? What does it mean when we say disrupt inequities? So what I'm gonna do is try to give you some situations where I'm capturing this idea, and then we can talk about how teachers can make different moves to start creating shifts in the classroom. So my hope is that we'll use today's experience to inform your future thinking and work related to designing and leading activities about disrupting inequity. So first of all, we need to think about naming and disrupting patterns that reproduce inequity. Well, why is this important? Well, historically, institutionally, and systemically, we see racism and other forms of oppression just permeating our society. And we see that particularly right now in today's world. So we're taking that spotlight focus and going, what can we do as educators to not produce that in our classrooms? So we need to look at how these patterns shape our everyday lives and practices, including inside of schools. So what are some of these things that we're talking about when we look at systematic racism? Well, one is the adultification and criminalization of Black children. And today I'm going to talk a lot about Black children and what we see that statistics say about them in the classroom. And then we're going to look at views of ability as a trait, ability language to describe children, and the overassignment of Black children to special education and under-identification for gifted programs. So right there, we see inequity in action, and that's what we have going on in some of our classrooms. Teaching is filled with opportunities for teachers to exercise discretion about their practice. It's through these exercises of this discretion that teaching either reproduces patterns or disrupts them. So today what we're going to look at is disrupting these patterns of inequity, and it requires that the teachers first recognize the patterns, then have the knowledge, skill, and commitment to break these habits of practice. So let's zoom in for a minute, and I'm going to show you some statistics here. And this is taken from a group of preschool students, and I have the link. I can show you where I grab these statistics. But we look at the enrollment of Black students, and this is just in a preschool. We look at the enrollment of Black students are 18%, but 48% of those students are suspended more than once in looking at their counterparts who are white children. So what does it mean that these are patterns? Well, what we see are Black preschoolers are 2.6 times more likely to be suspended than white children. And that's based on the statistics that were shared on that last screen. So we're seeing that Latinx, Black, Native, Indigenous students are punished more often and more harshly than other groups. We see that Black girls are disproportionately subjected to exclusionary discipline practices. Students with disabilities are punished more often and more harshly than other groups. And discipline disparities for Black children, boys, and students with disabilities are observed as early as pre-K. So that's why I wanted to share some statistics with as early as preschool. We start seeing teachers identifying certain groups of students and punishing behaviors based on characteristics of who these individuals, what they look like, rather than for who they are. So now what I want to do is share an example with you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second, and then I'm going to take you into a YouTube video, and we're only going to watch about 4 minutes. But what I want you to do is listen to the speaker. His name is Dr. Richard Milner from Vanderbilt University, and he talks about an example of this that he experienced with his own children when he was selecting a preschool. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second, and I'll come back to this, giving it a minute as I maneuver back and forth here. Okay, so now I'm going to share my other screen, and hopefully this will work just seamlessly. Are you seeing a picture of a video that it looks like from YouTube? I'm hoping so. If not, Cynthia,
Yeah.
let me know.
Yeah,
okay.
You're there.
Perfect. I'm going to press play. I'm also going to put on the closed captions, so if you can't hear it, that you can read the dialogue.
When this day is over, so that you can get your hubby back, right? Several years ago, I faced a powerful experience as I searched for a preschool for my almost 4-year-old twin daughters. My dilemma was straightforward. How do I advocate for and choose a preschool that cultivated both their education needs and also their needs as Black girls? Drawing from the Mamie and Kenneth Clark Dahl test, which provided an empirical base for the Brown decision, Child and Human Development scholar Margaret Bill Spencer has stressed the importance of young children's racial identity as well as their cognitive development. I want my daughters to develop an identity space that embraces their language, their dialect, their history, their hair, their ancestry, as well as their racial and cultural roots. In just 2 years, I have visited many preschool facilities, including home facilities, searching for the right place for my daughters. During one visit, a group of 5 students, were standing in the center of a classroom talking. There was one Black boy, 3 white boys, and 1 white girl playing together in the classroom. As I watched, the preschool teacher told Jamal, you are too loud. Let's use your indoor voice, please. The teacher turned back to me and continued answering my questions. Soon, she turned again to the 5 youngsters, but again focused her words on one. Jamal, you are too loud. I'm going to have to ask you to take your seat if you keep it up. Colleagues and friends, I was stunned. What I observed was a group of 5 students, that's right, I said it, yelling and not using their indoor voice, but this teacher heard only one voice, Jamal's. I wondered how this singling out may have affected Jamal's self-concept, his voice, and his identity. Coupled with my years of observations in middle and high school classrooms, this experience reminded me that in some contexts, exclusion as a form of punishment is based in part on race. I came to understand from data compiled by the Office of Civil Rights that disparity and inequality start in preschool. During the 2000.
So I'm going to stop it right there. So I wanted to give you a snippet of some history that we have a scholar talking from his own history and looking for preschools for his children, and how teachers tend to single out one particular type of student when we see a group of students playing and interacting together. But why is it that the Black child is the one that's always the focus or the one that's called on? And so we see this as something that's more prevalent in our classrooms, and we first have to be aware that that is happening, that that's perceptions that teachers see happening, so that we can call it into question, be reflective, and go, how might I choose a different path, or how might I make a different teacher move in this particular circumstance. So again, I'm going to turn your attention back to the PowerPoint here. So bear with me as I switch screens one more time here. So when we zoom in a little bit further, and this goes back to looking at suspension rates for Black girls. So again, we're looking at just targeting certain individuals, and you can look at these charts and see that there's just some variance in terms of what we see happening. You might go, well, what is really important about this? When we look at the statistics a little bit more closely, we see Black girls are more likely to be disciplined for subjective infractions. So what does that mean? Well, they're 2 times more likely for minor violations. So these are things like being signaled out for dress code violations, inappropriate cell phone use, loitering, those kinds of things. 2.5 times more likely to be signaled out for disobedient behavior, 3 times more likely for being called on by the teacher for disruptive behavior, and 3 times more likely for bullying or harassment than their white counterparts. And here's the citation for the research. I can share this with all of you too if you're interested in looking at where I pulled the stats from. So what does it take to anticipate and disrupt these patterns in Black girls' experiences? Well, first we have to be aware of the patterns. So there's some disapproving stereotypes that individuals have out there about Black girls, that they're either threatened or they see them as aggressive or loud. And this is all based on how the teacher is perceiving them rather than who they really are. So this is that bias that's brought into the classroom from that role of teacher. And this is all based on the teacher's tendency to want more control in the classroom rather than relinquishing control more to students. So it's an understanding that if these are manifestations of broad cultural and societal patterns, we're seeing them reproduced in the classroom. So we need to start in the classroom and think about shifting these. So how do we do that? How do we disrupt these patterns? So consciously not following or reproducing the patterns and doing something different. So first, recognizing that they're happening and then going, ooh, what might I do differently in this circumstance? So here's an example. Not calling on a student out for a minor behavior. Oop, let me go back. That is not distracting anybody else, but bothering you as the teacher. Engaging students deliberately in high status specific roles. So when you call on students in a math classroom to say, share their solutions, be strategic on who you call. If you call students of color up to share their work, you're assigning competence to them. And so other members of the classroom will look at that and go, the teacher's calling on those students, so that puts them in a more powerful role. So that's something you want to be aware of as a teacher. Who are you calling on to share in the classroom? So publicly acknowledging mathematical competence. That's another way to do it. So what we're doing is to work to disrupt inequities through teaching, and it requires us to learn and unlearn what we've encountered before. So what we're going to do in a minute is I'm going to show you a video of a student, and I'm going to ask you what you see and how you read this particular child. So we're going to watch a video clip. It's only about 30 seconds long, and I want you to write down any thoughts about how Lorraine, that's the student that we're going to be focused on, how she might be read from the teacher, okay? So again, I'm going to stop sharing the screen in a second and go back to the YouTube video so you can take a look. But here's the teacher, and here's the student in question, and her name's Lorraine. So give me a second here as I maneuver back to my other screen and pull up the video. Okay. So I think we're on the wrong screen. Give me one more second here. Sorry about that.
You had it.
I did.
Uh-huh.
So I did that all for nothing.
Just push play.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gautreaux.
You're welcome, Dr. Brye.
You're wonderful to help me out here. Okay, so here we go. Thank you. And I'll also put on the closed captioning. It is very hard to hear the dialogue. So what I'd like you to do is make sure that you're watching the screen. I'm going to play it more than once, but hopefully you're taking some notes on what you see.
You should be recording by now. What else are we doing? What does it say? Do something that's impossible. What does it say? Read me the problem. Following all the stories, life and purple and yellow was a three-card phrase. Friends, everyone and Rachel. Okay. Can you make one three-card train?
Okay, I'm going to replay it again.
You should be recording by now. What else are we doing? What does it say? Do something that's impossible. What does it say? Read me the problem. Following all the stories, life and purple and yellow was a three-card phrase. Friends, everyone and Rachel. Okay. Can you make one three-card train?
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen again here and take you back to the PowerPoint. So this kind of shows you the dialogue. I know that you read it through the video, but this kind of tells you a little bit about what we see. So we see Lorraine saying it's confusing. The teacher said you should be recording right now. Lorraine says, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. The teacher says, what does it say? Lorraine says, do something that's impossible. And the teacher says, what does it say? Read me the problem. And Lorraine says, fine. So here's where I turn to you, and I'd love it if you at least feel comfortable unmuting yourself and sharing with me anything you think might be a common response that a teacher would have in seeing the student in the classroom and coming up and interacting with that student. Oh, I see Amy Nigro joined us too. Hi, Amy. You don't have to say hi back. I know you're unmuted there, but just wanted to give you a shout out. So thinking about a typical classroom there, you were a teacher, is there anything that you could see maybe a teacher would do with that student?
I know you're unmuted, you're all muted, but if you could type it in the chat window, that would be great. You could read off what you wrote in the chat window.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Cynthia, do you mind reading some of those off for me?
Sure. So somebody wrote frustration.
Good. Okay.
Hold on a second. I think they're finding the chat window. So to access the chat window, you want to go to the bottom of the screen. There's a icon there, and under it says chat. And then you could click on that, and that will give you access to the chat window.
And so again, we're looking at how the teacher might read the student right here. That's Lorraine.
Okay, so here's another response. Thinking that the student might have an attitude.
Is there something about that? Why would that student be seen as having an attitude? Is there anything that you see about that student that triggers that?
Another student comment is, I have a question. Does Lorraine say something impossible because that is what he is reading? Or is it because that's their opinion? Like, are they remarking on the problem that the problem is impossible?
Yeah, great. So I like that you're asking a question like wonderment. Is this student saying it's impossible because they don't want to play along, they don't want to do the task, or do they see this as something that's like an unreasonable ask, or not sure of an entry point into the math problem? Good. Are there any other things in the chat, Cynthia, before I go on?
I think they're just given 1 minute to type. So what was the answer to that question, Michelle? Is it Was it the actual question, was it's impossible, or did the student just not understand?
So I'm going to hold off on that because we're going to actually pick it up and watch the video again and watch how the teacher plays this out. So I stopped it strategically right here to just kind of see what are common responses. And I thank you for all of you playing in the chat, and thank you, Cynthia, for reading out those questions to me and those comments. I really appreciate it. It's helpful because it leads us to where we're going. Some of the common responses, one might be, Lorraine, I need you to sit up straight and read that again. So again, in this, the focus is on her body, right? Lorraine's behavior is read as resistant. So just kind of slunched over. So the teacher might read that as they don't want to engage, they need to sit up. There's a proper way to like receive instruction. Another thing a teacher might say, this is a common response that we see in the classroom, is if you can't sit up and do the work right now, Lorraine, I'm going to ask you to sit out for a bit. So that's something we might see. Well, what's the cause of that? Well, the focus again is on her behavior. She's read as not trying to relate. And it's all related to her posture, right? So we see it again, just reading her body language rather than looking at her as having actual puzzlement and wondering about the problem. And then there was a boy sitting next to her so the teacher might say, Chasm, would you please show Lorraine what we are supposed to be doing? A lot of times we see a teacher move where we refocus the student by asking another student to show them what's going on. And the result of that is her posture is read as not engaged. So she's not trying, she doesn't know the answer. And so let's have this other boy who maybe is seen as more capable explain to her what the problem is. So we can see all of this is focused on behavior. And right there, the teacher is assigning incompetence to the student. If you respond in these ways, you're making a decision that the student doesn't have the knowledge or doesn't have the interest in learning from what you're presenting in the mathematics classroom. So these are things that I've done before in my own teaching where I look at and go, oh my gosh, I was focusing on the student had a hoodie over their head, and I know that's not allowed, so I'm just gonna give them a hard time about having their hoodie on. And what that ends up doing is they don't wanna share, they don't wanna play with me anymore because I've already just broken them down. So this is getting us to just focus on ourselves and going, what am I doing to set the stage in a classroom so that it's inviting and that all students can participate, and I'm not just focusing on a certain type of student. And so we see this happening in practice. And so we have to think about what are moves that can name that disrupt this common pattern of reading and interacting with this Black student, but Black students in general. And I think this is what some of you were getting to in that chat when looking at her question of, is this impossible? And do something that's impossible. That's what Lorraine says. So is that really what she thinks, or is that her being disrespectful or not wanting to engage in the problem? Well, if we look at it as the teacher and we say, well, we want to see this as puzzlement and that it's genuine, and trust that. She's confused about what the task is, or perhaps she's not understanding what the task is. That doesn't mean she doesn't want to engage in it. And looking at this child, that there is brilliance there, there's competence there, that all children can be successful. So what do I need to do as a teacher to allow them to enter this problem, to clarify, to re-engage them? So this is where the focus is, rather than going on, oh, they're a behavior problem and I need to nip that in the butt. But what can I do instead, and look at them as they may just have a real question about what I'm asking them to do. And I feel like that's what some of you were saying in the chat. And then having them do something different to do. So let me go to my next slide here. I'm going to show you the video, another video. It's actually the same one. So Cynthia, you'll kind of see how this plays out. I know you had asked about what does end up happening. So Here's from the second video. I have the dialogue. I'll come back to it so that you can actually see it. But what I'd like to do is stop sharing, take you back to the video so you can watch the whole of it. And then I'll also put in the closed captioning so that you can see the dialogue from it as well. So let me go ahead and stop sharing. Just getting it queued up here, so bear with me. Right here. There we go. So I'm hoping we see the video here. It's going to play from the very beginning, so what you'll see is what we watched before, and then you'll see how the teacher decided to interact with the student.
You should be recording by now. What else are we doing? What does it say? Do something that's impossible. What does it say? Read me the problem. Fine. All my stories, life when you have blue, yellow, orange, or three-card friends. Friends, I've been one of nature. Okay. Can you make one three-card train? Can you sit up, please? Thank you. Can you make one three-card train? I did. It's not a three-card train. Yes, it is. And it's three. Yeah, a three-card train means three cars are in the train. Three cars. I see what you're saying. Okay, so you can record that one. Okay, now can you make a different one? Let's creep just now. Okay, can you record that one? Oh, I get it.
Should I play it one more time? I think sometimes it's easier to see the second time, so I'm going to play it again here.
You should be recording by now. What else are we doing? What does it say? Do something that's impossible. What does it say? Read me the problem. Fine. All my stories, life when you have blue, yellow, orange, or three-card friends. Friends, I've been one of nature. Okay. Can you make one three-card train? Can you sit up, please? Thank you. Can you make one three-card train? I did. It's not a three-card train. Yes, it is. And it's three. Yeah, a three-card train means three cars are in the train. Three cars. I see what you're saying. Okay, so you can record that one. Okay, now can you make a different one? Let's creep just now. Okay, can you record that one? Oh, I get it.
Okay, so I'm going to take you back to the PowerPoint here. And then I'd love to hear from some of you. So Cynthia, you might be able to help again with that, with the chat here. So here's the dialogue. So the teacher walks up, can you make one three-car train? Can you sit up, please? Thank you. Can you make one three-car train? I did. That's not a three-car train. Yes, it is. That is three. A three-car train means that there are three cars are in the train. Okay, so she does it. Okay, so you can record that one. Okay, can you make a different one? And then she records that. And it's, oh, I get it. And we go from there. So how did the teacher respond to Lorraine, and what did you notice about Lorraine? And actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'd rather hear from all of you. What are your thoughts after watching how the teacher interacted with Lorraine based on the dialogue that she had on nonverbal cues that you see her interacting with the student in the classroom? Great. So if any of you want to jump in and just say anything you noticed, and if you don't want to unmute yourself, if you at least want to go into the chat and tell me anything you note from the teacher in this video. So to get back, while you're thinking and collecting your thoughts and maybe coming up with what you want to put in the chat, I'm going to go back to the question that Celine put in the chat from before. When Lorraine says something is impossible, is it because he's reading, or that his opinion or remark to what the problem is, actually reading, not understanding how to do the problem? So what we can see from the teacher actually talking to the student, it looked like there was not understanding the problem. So it wasn't that they were being flippant or trying to be disrespectful, but that there was just some clarity that needed to happen. And the teacher sat with that student and talked to him about what a 3-car train meant. And so that student was able to show a strategy and, hey, can you do another one? So right there, she was reading it as actual wonderment about the problem, not being disrespectful. And I see that, thank you, Amy, for jumping in on the chat there, that the teacher identified what the student did not understand and explained the question in a different way. Right, so digging a little bit deeper, can you read the question? Okay, show me a 3-car train. And right there, you could see that was where the confusion was. There were 3 parts, but they weren't connected to make the train. So in just having that conversation with the student, they were able to explain their thinking. Anybody else notice anything from the teacher perspective or the student? Yes, I love that. So we have Dr. Gautreaux said the teacher seems a bit cold towards the student. Okay, so thinking about how to be more inviting to the student, or also this idea of keeping it like this. So we're not angry with the student for the behavior necessarily, but we're not overly praising either. The instructions kind of kept right here. It's a pretty level tone throughout. And so I've heard that before too, that can seem kind of cold and where the student maybe would not feel comfortable interacting. So we want to think about, how are we being read by our students, right? And then another comment, the teacher asked the student to make another one to check for understanding. Yes. So just because they were able to solve it in one way, then pushing it further. Okay, you've recorded it in one way. Can you think about other ways to record this? So again, we see from that philosophical lens that the teacher is promoting multiple ways of problem solving, multiple routes of getting there, and pushing the student to show it in a different way as well. So checking for clarity, making sure there's understanding there. Good. I don't know if anybody picked up on, but as the teacher was talking with the student, she asked the student to read the question again, or read the task. So checking for understanding from reading the task, and then asking the student to sit up. And the student sat up. And she thanked the student for doing that. So right there, you can already see with the body language that was back here, the student started to engage. And by the end, the last comment we hear from the student is, oh, I get it. And so they're able to engage with the task. And that right there, just from seeing how the teacher interacts with the student, in a lot of classrooms, that would have ended up escalating to something more, because you have a student coming in with this hoodie on and, oh, they don't want to be there. And there's all these assumptions that are read into these classrooms. And we see this all the time. So this is why I wanted to highlight a little part of practice, so that you can look at what this looks like in classroom, and just making that shift and looking at students having something to contribute, that they're powerful thinkers, that they're competent, and looking at their questions as actual puzzlement, not necessarily that they're being obstinate, or that there is a challenge or something that would engage in some kind of behavior conflict with the teacher. So we saw that with the first speaker when we were looking at the AERA video, where he was talking about his own personal experience with choosing a preschool for his children. And then we saw it in this snippet of looking at a classroom of students working on math instruction. So basically for today, I wanted to highlight different areas of where we see these patterns that just keep replaying in classrooms. And what we see is certain students start feeling less and less and less in little ways, in big ways, that they're being marginalized, where they're being picked on, where all of these things are happening in classrooms. And so we have a whole population of students that are kind of falling through the cracks or not feeling as powerful learners. And that's not okay. And our job as teachers is to value everybody and to think about access points for everybody and to see everybody as competent and having something to contribute. And this also calls into question, what do we look at in terms of behavior problems rather than actually looking at the content and the willingness that these students do want to learn. So how might I shift things to get at that knowledge with them? So hopefully you saw a couple of examples of this. I wanted to highlight it and bring it to that practical stage, but that's kind of what I had for today. So I'm happy to do any kind of Q&A. Dr. Gautreaux, if you wanted to cut the video at this